Have you ever been the odd one out on an inside joke? It's an uncomfortable feeling, like you've missed out on an important moment. Where did that joke start? Why is it so funny? And how long have your friends been telling it when you weren't around? Being left out of an inside joke sucks, because it's rare to be able to be brought into the fold in a way where the joke originally started.
Long story, you had to be there.
Inside jokes depend strongly on context and timing, the right people in the right place at the right time. Everyone who wasn't there, everyone who showed up late, is on the outside. I've been a part of my fair share of inside jokes before, and I've been left out of many as well. Still, I can't help but find them fascinating, because they underlie an important cultural trend, one that permeates not only our daily lives, but even the world of video games. I've been playing games literally my entire life. I remember going to my cousin's house and learning to play Ocarina of Time on the N64. My teenage rebellion phase began and ended on September 25th, 2007, when I snuck out of the house at 11:30 p.m. and rode my bike over to GameStop for the midnight release of Halo 3. I even won their Halo trivia contest, and I was grounded the next day. And of course now, I play and write about video games. I play a little bit of everything. RPGs, puzzle games, Souls-likes, MMOs, fighters, FPSs, yes, even RTSs, despite the comments on our last video. Thanks for the suggestion, by the way, about Beyond All Reason. I am loving it. Even whatever the hell this genre is. Yet, somehow, in all this time, I've been an outsider to a major cultural icon in video games, and I haven't really caught up to it. Hey everyone, my name is Max, and I've never played Final Fantasy. I imagine some of you watching this right now are thinking, yeah, so? But I'm willing to bet that everyone here has at least one series, maybe in a video game, maybe in a TV show, but one series that you've always wanted to get into, but never have. Maybe your friends have inside jokes about it that you just don't understand. Maybe it's that one game from your favorite genre that everyone says, oh my God, you have to play this. But in some way, this thing has you on the outside. And for me, that thing is the 130 plus games in the world of Final Fantasy. Okay, just to clarify a little bit, technically I have played Final Fantasy Tactics Advanced and Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit, and I've dabbled in both MMOs because I'm a bit of an MMO slut, but for the purposes of this video, I'm really focused on the mainline Final Fantasy games. It's really difficult to describe the draw that Final Fantasy has had on my life, despite never having played the core games. The series was ever present when I was growing up. I would flip past reviews and full-page ads in Game Informer magazines. I visited the Final Fantasy Cafe in Osaka during one of my trips to Japan, and I remember vividly listening to MIDI versions of the soundtracks to these games as background music while I was playing games like RuneScape or Neopets. The series was huge, and I always wanted to be a part of it, but I was stuck on the other side of the console divide. Final Fantasy was a game for kids with parents who loved them, and I was stuck with, well, with this guy. And there was a sense, especially as a teenager, that I was on the outside of a major cultural movement in gaming, which felt kind of uncomfortable. So on the few occasions that the franchise dipped its toes into Mario's domain, I would get a glimpse into this vast world that I wanted desperately to explore. Nintendo had this playful, child-friendly, parent-approved veneer to it, though underneath the colorful and cutesy graphics were games with amazing depth of story and gameplay. And the GameCube era especially opened us up to some of the best of this, games like Tales of Symphonia and Paper Mario, Baten Kaitos, and to a lesser-known game that to this day sits in the most impactful games I have ever played, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. Crystal Chronicles was a spin-off of the Final Fantasy series. It wasn't in the main line of games. It was made exclusively for the GameCube and designed as a 4-player co-op, meant to bridge Nintendo's handheld and console audiences. And what a lot of people don't know is that it was every parent's nightmare. The story was pretty simple, and it pulled from a lot of elements from the mainline Final Fantasy games. You play as town adventurers in a world marred by miasma, this nauseous gas that would normally kill you if it weren't for the power of the crystals and the myrrh that sustains them. Your caravan is responsible for venturing out to find the myrrh trees, gathering their essence and feeding it to the crystal in order to ensure the town's safety for yet one more year. The story was pretty meh, but where the game shined was in its 4-player co-op. I played hours upon hours of Crystal Chronicles with my friends. It features one of the most beautiful and unique soundtracks under the Final Fantasy title, this time by Kumi Tanioka, who gave the game a gorgeous blend of world music with real folk instruments. And its emphasis on character customization, teamwork, and role-based multiplayer combat cemented it as one of my favorite games of all time, and one of only 2 Final Fantasy games aside from the MMOs that I would play for the next 20 years. Which would have been cute if the game didn't cost over $500. See, in multiplayer, everybody needed their own Game Boy Advance and GameCube link cable. The extra screen allowed you to manage the inventory for menus on the Game Boy rather than hogging the screen where the action was. And what was really cool was that each player had a random map that only they could access on their Game Boy. So someone was responsible for tracking treasures around the map, while another player would see the locations of monsters. This gave players a sense of responsibility and purpose to their team, which I can't say I've ever seen in any other game since then. Honestly, the system of having a shared screen and a personal screen was really cool, and the link cable could be used in a ton of other GameCube games as well. But if your friends didn't have their own Game Boys, well, guess who ended up buying them? Crystal Chronicles was remastered and re-released in 2020, and it was easily the worst thing that happened that year. I said it! Imagine hearing your favorite game of all time was being re-released, only for the final product to be literally unplayable and missing the heart and soul of the original. Can you tell I'm a little bit passionate about this one? It deserves its own video because honestly, the mystery behind this game's re-release is... it's baffling. And that's honestly a bit of a shame, because if you would want to play the original Crystal Chronicles experience, nowadays you'd have to get your hands on a GameCube, 4 Game Boy Advances, and 4 link cables, which is actually quite hard to do. I was really hoping that the re-release of the game was going to bring in a new audience back into one of my favorite games that I've ever played. Anyway, the remaster of Crystal Chronicles was the perfect case study of how not to re-release a game. But earlier that same year, a different game was revived by the team at Square Enix that would redefine what it meant to be a fan of Final Fantasy. Ask anyone alive in the 90s for their list of best games ever made, and you're going to hear about Final Fantasy VII. It's a game enshrined in top 100 lists and Google search results. For years, I had heard stories about this game and the impact that it had on the people who first played it. And while their stories lined up similarly to the way that I felt about my favorite games, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed out on this cultural phenomenon. I was 5 years old when the game came out, so like, goo goo gaga, but I remember this single game almost being used as a litmus test of whether you had great taste in games. I remember being asked if I'd played the game and admitting, no, I haven't, and feeling this sort of guilt, like I was on the other side of a line separating real gamers from everyone else, which is of course ridiculous, but I don't know, that's just how I felt. So why didn't I just go back and play the game? It was available to be played, right? Well, an element of Final Fantasy VII's popularity was its historical relevance. The game was expansive, and the story unfolded cinematically in a way that at the time, many had never experienced in video games before. Final Fantasy VII blew people's minds when it came out, so much so that it stands among modern examples of the greatest games ever made. That said, unless you're a game historian or someone who truly understands the context and the evolution of games throughout the 80s and 90s, playing Final Fantasy VII for the first time today would make for a very different experience than playing it in 1997. I'm neither of those things, and that's one of the reasons why I never went back to play the original. How could I appreciate a game's novelties today in 2024 after playing so many of the games that were built on the back of its success? I'm confident that had I gone back and played the original game, I could have found enjoyment in the story and appreciation for its artwork, but it wouldn't have made its way onto my list of the best games ever made. The time had passed to play Final Fantasy VII. I wasn't going to understand or appreciate the game the way that it was meant to be played and experienced. I was going to be on the outside of that fandom forever. Or so I thought. Because a project was announced that shattered space and time. Final Fantasy VII was getting a remake. The internet erupted. And I have to be brutally honest, at the time, I didn't really care. How could I? I didn't know these characters. I didn't know this city. The game, beyond its cultural significance, was insignificant to me. Why would I care about the remake of a game that I had never played? So 2020 came and went, and then years later, something changed. Okay, so I had to pull over because I was listening to the latest episode of the Friends Per Second podcast. It's a show that I listen to all the time. I absolutely love these folks. And they started talking about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is the second in the series of remakes for Final Fantasy VII. And it was weird because I hadn't even played the remake. I think it came out 4 years ago. But I want to go in completely fresh with like no outside information about the game. And so I am sitting here in front of a GameStop. I think it might be time that I finally get my hands on Final Fantasy VII, or some version of it. Let's go. I had missed the boat on Final Fantasy VII. Once in 1997, again in 2020 with the Final Fantasy VII remake, but news in 2024 and the overwhelming positivity about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was this reminder there was this thing that I wanted to be a part of, and this opportunity to be a part of it right in front of me. I felt a level of excitement for Final Fantasy VII that I had never felt before. Like it wasn't just the game that was being revived, but the excitement and the fandom around this game was too. After 20 years of hearing about what Final Fantasy VII meant to people, I downloaded Final Fantasy VII Remake, the first of the trilogy, I suppose, in this series. I went in preparing to feel like the odd one out on an inside joke. But holy shit, the game is incredible. The way they build these characters and tell their stories, the way that I found myself crying at moments that like weren't even that emotional. I just felt like I was a part of their experience. Plus, being able to customize all of those weapons and tweak just them. Not only that, the little mini games, re-envisioning the game, they didn't actually ever feel combat. The soundtrack is gorgeous. While I was playing, I had to remind myself that Final Fantasy VII Remake is not Final Fantasy VII. But for the first time, I felt like I finally understood what the original game means to many people. Sure, I wasn't there when the game transformed the industry, but something about the remake reignited my passion for games. The care and attention to detail put in the storytelling of every character led me to tear up during moments that weren't even that meaningful. I was just excited about the future of these characters, more than I've ever been about any character I can remember in recent games. In brief moments, I could feel that the game was paying homage to its predecessor, these little inside jokes that I didn't quite understand, or maybe sometimes flew over my head, but my experience of the game was still my own. I've realized that my story of playing Final Fantasy VII is going to be very different from somebody who played the game back in 1997. How could it compare? But experiencing the game through the remake, I feel a new connection to the wider cultural importance of Final Fantasy VII's legacy. There were great games released before 1997, of course, and many more released since then, but I'm reminded through Final Fantasy VII that with each passing year, there's a new audience born who will never get the chance to experience the games that I love the way that I experience them. And I think that's the real power that video game remakes can have on their audience.
People laugh, but I really think this game has the power to bring folks together in a way few things can.
I'm sure it's exciting for veteran players of a series to play a reimagining of their favorite game, but for those who have never experienced it before, remakes are an opportunity not only to revive the wonder of an incredible story in a new era, but to welcome outsiders into the fandom. Hey, it's Max here. It's been a little while since our last video. Gotta be honest, 2024 has been kind of kicking my butt, but we're back in the swing of things. I am gearing up in a couple of weeks to head to Korea and Japan for, I think it'll be my 4th time in Japan and my 2nd time in Korea. The last time I was there, I was actually performing across country, so I didn't really get a chance to experience a lot of the culture there. I cannot wait to check these out and to share some of this experience with you all through the channel. I'm really, really excited for that. Don't forget, if you liked what you saw, hit the subscribe button. Let me know down in the comments. I'm actually kind of curious if any of you have experienced a remake, maybe remakes that lived up to your expectations of the remake, or maybe a remake that didn't live up to your experience with the remake. I would love to hear from you all. And don't forget, we've got a Patreon over at patreon.com/voxelshow, where we're probably going to do a recap, a little bit of maybe a conversation about Final Fantasy VII, the remake and rebirth, with no spoilers, just talking about what the game means to us and the effect that it's had on myself and some of the other participants. So stay tuned for that. I can't wait to share it with you. It's going to be so exciting. That's over on Patreon. And hey, until the next one, see you later, gamers.